Hi, so Ralph Underhill is a former environmental lobbyist, now communications consultant, and sometimes cartoonist. And I came across Ralph's animal traps of framing mistakes to avoid a few years ago. And whenever I do trainings with activists, they're one of the most popular exercises that they tell me for putting a name and a kind of cute face to the mistakes we want to avoid with our messaging and framing. So I wanted to talk to Ralph a little bit about a new guide that you've got coming out with a full 10 animal traps for us to take into consideration. To start with, Ralph, what could progressive campaigners be doing better with our communications in general?
I think one of the things I found from working with groups across lots of different issues, lots of different topics, is a sort of the professionalisation and expertise of those groups leads them to be able to talk less well to their audiences. The more you get caught up in a subject, the further away you get from that audience that you're trying to talk to. And I think one of the things I really recommend to people is when you have new members of staff, so often they're confused by what everyone's talking about, and we talk about getting people up to speed. And in fact, what we should be doing is listening, because they're much more representative of the audience we're trying to talk to. So I think a lot of the impreciseness in some of the communication that we come up with, or our failure to land with our audience, is because we just moved apart from them. And we spend a lot of time talking in the language of science or government, rather than the language of those people that we're trying to talk to, like our supporters and activists.
And why did you then create these animal traps?
First of all, I'm a zoologist and I love animals, and actually that's one of the things I feel slightly conflicted about, because I'm labelling some of these animals with like sort of bad habits. But something I found is there's a lot of theory in framing and social psychology that is very interesting, but sometimes feels slightly intangible. So people get quite excited by the ideas, but they find it hard to pin down what they do as a result. And the reason I use the animal traps is to try and make something memorable to mark each of the sort of pitfalls that we sometimes come across.
Tell us about the parrot.
The parrot, or the repetition trap, is when we repeat the language of our opposition. This is the only time I ever do an impression, but Nixon, he famously said, "I am not a crook."
Well, I'm not a crook.
And instantly, people all across America thought, he's a crook, right? What he should have said is, "I'm an honest man," right? And there are countless examples of this throughout the work of NGOs, of campaigners, and even in the media. When we say something that echoes the thing we're trying to fight, all we do is make those associations in someone's mind. So if we say poverty is not natural, right, that's very different to saying poverty is something that's created, right? Because when we say poverty is not natural, we're linking natural and poverty and making that reinforced in people's brains. So we always want to say the thing we want to say, not refute the thing we don't.
And what about the chameleon?
So the chameleon is what I call a sanitising trap. And I think this is one of the big examples where we're taking the language of government or business and repeating it ourselves and using that without thinking about the consequences of what those words mean. So the chameleon is when we use words that make damaging activities seem less bad. There's quite a lot of examples of this. So we might say biodiversity loss, and that makes it sound like it's a passive thing, that biodiversity is like under the couch or under the sofa or whatever, rather than destruction of wildlife, right? That's much more visceral. Or we might say austerity instead of damaging cuts to public services. Okay, these terms are longer, but they're much more visceral and they connect more with the audience, and people know exactly what you're talking about. And I think we need to put some of the emotion back into our communications rather than using a lot of this language that looks more objective and doesn't really connect with people.
And finally, what's a rat trap? Or at least what's a rat trap in this sense?
The rat trap is the misunderstanding trap. And I think this is a key one. Hopefully we're going to show a diagram at this point of two overlapping circles. So if you think of the two overlapping circles, one being how you see a word, all the associations you have with the word, so when you hear it, all the things that go off in your mind that you associate with it. And the other one is your audience, right? And so when you use a term, say like sustainability, you might be thinking, well, that's something that goes on forever. It takes people, environment, resources into consideration. Your public might just have heard sustainability in so many different arenas that they just think of it as like something that's slightly green, right? So then your meanings are very different.
Great. So we've gone into detail on the Parrot, the Chameleon, and the Rat Trap. And people should read your full guide that's coming up for tips, more examples, and also exercises to help sort of work through some of this advice. Do you want to give us just like a quick run through of what the other 7 animal traps that they can find advice on in this guide?
There's the platypus, which is about trying to like fit the kitchen sink into your message, putting too many different things in. The sloth, which is about not being active enough. Often we make things seem inevitable, and that makes people feel fatalistic. So we have to be more active in our communication. The anglerfish, which are those things that go around in the sea with a big like lure on them. That's about what's missing, like what's outside the message that we're not talking about. The cobra is about overdoing threats and how we need to be giving solutions and making people feel a bit more positive, although we can't hide away from the source of the problem. The shark is about using terms that are sort of contaminated, like how Jaws, the film, has made everyone scared of great whites when before that they weren't seen in that sort of light. The robin is about criticizing people things that people really love. So we've got to be careful not to use language. So if we were against the military, we wouldn't say we need to disband our troops. We would say we need to disband our army. And the last one is the virus trap, which is about othering. It's about dehumanizing other groups. So when we use terminology that make other people seem less like us. So there's a lot in there. I don't expect you to know all of them just from me skimming over those last 7. But I think it's really exciting. I think there's quite a few that you'll be able to put into action straight away in your work. And that's the thing I'm really passionate about. You should be able to use these traps right away. So if you do any communication in any way, it doesn't have to be external. Even with your colleagues, hopefully you'll find this helpful.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ralph. That's going to be really useful.